Most of our history books that talk about Chandragupta Maurya mentions that before establishing the Mauryan Empire, Chandragupta Maurya had met Alexander. These history books tell us that Chandragupta Maurya had arrived in the camp of Alexander to seek his help. Chandragupta Maurya wanted Alexander to attack the Nanda Empire. But Alexander did not like the demeanor of Chandragupta Maurya and he ordered that Chandragupta Maurya should be put to death. But thankfully this did not happen as Chandragupta Maurya was able to safely flee from Alexander's camp. I'm sure most of you know about this story. In fact, I too have mentioned this story in my video on Chandragupta Maurya. But recently, when I was reading these classical Western sources that talk about Alexander's invasion for my video where I discuss whether Alexander knew about the Nandas, I realized that there might be some problem with the whole story of Chandragupta Maurya and Alexander meeting each other. And after analyzing these classical Western sources, I can confidently say that this whole episode may just be a myth. So let me present my arguments. First, as I have discussed in one of my previous videos, that when we talk about Alexander's invasion of India, we have only Western sources. And these Western sources are divided by scholars into two traditions, official and Vulgate. Now, first I should clarify that all of these sources are not contemporary sources. They were written at least 300 years after Alexander's death. If we look at the official tradition, which is represented by Arrian's analysis of Alexander, it tends to be, according to scholars, flattering and sober. Now, if that is the case, what can be more flattering than retelling the whole episode when Chandragupta, or Sandrocotus as Arrian calls him, came to Alexander to seek his help. But surprisingly, there is not a single mention of this incident in the whole account. What is even more striking is that it is not like Chandragupta Maurya does not appear in Arrian's account. He does appear in it. And Arrian calls Chandragupta Maurya the king of Indians. In fact, Arrian had written a treatise called Indica that was based on Megasthenes' Indica. So, considering all this, what can be a better way to portray Alexander as a great ruler than to retell the whole story when Chandragupta Maurya, the king of Indians, came to Alexander's camp to ask for his help. But Arrian does not mention it. Now, if we move to the Vulgate tradition, which is represented by Diodorus and Curtius, we also see the same thing. Here too, there is not a single mention of this incident. Now, you must be wondering that if these sources do not mention the meeting of Alexander and Chandragupta Maurya, then how our history books talk about this meeting? The answer is that these history books draw their conclusion based on two sources, Plutarch and Justin. If we look at Plutarch, who wrote the life of Alexander, he uses the name Androcotus for Chandragupta Maurya. And about this episode, he writes, and I quote, Androcotus himself, who was then but a youth, saw Alexander himself, and afterwards used to declare that Alexander could easily have taken possession of the whole country, since the king was hated and despised by his subjects for the wickedness of his disposition and the meanness of his origin. Here, the king of the mean origin is the Nanda king. Now, if we look at Justin's account, he has this to tell about this whole episode. For when by his insolent behavior he had offended Alexandrum and was ordered by the king to be put to death, he sought safety by a speedy flight. So from these two extracts, you can clearly see what our history books do. They combine these two sources to tell us that before Chandragupta Maurya had founded the Mauryan Empire, he met Alexander. And the reason for this meeting was to seek Alexander's help in the destruction of the Nanda Empire. But Because of Chandragupta Maurya's insolent behavior, Alexander felt insulted and he ordered that Chandragupta Maurya should be put to death. But thankfully, Chandragupta Maurya managed to escape from Alexander's camp. In my view, there are great problems with these two sources that lead us to question the whole event. Let's start with Justin's account. In this passage which I have showed you, Alexandrum term appears. But there are various scholars who argue that here the name Alexandrum is incorrect. In place of Alexandrum, it should be Nandrum. This substitution makes sense because if we replace Alexandrum with Nandrum, the whole passage makes sense. If you read this account, you can clearly see that here Justin is talking about the Nanda king, not Alexander. If we move to Plutarch, his account is full of factual inaccuracies. For instance, we are told that Alexander and his army had reached the river Ganga and his soldiers were unwilling to cross this great river. The reason for this hesitation was the presence of Indian soldiers on the other side. Plutarch writes, "For the kings of the Gandharidae and the Prasai were reported to be waiting for him with an army of 80,000 horse, 2 lakh foot, 8,000 war chariots and 6,000 fighting elephants." Now, as you can see from these details that most of it is factually incorrect. Alexander never reached the bank of river Ganga and there were no two kings of Prasai and Gandharidae waiting for him. And when it comes to Plutarch's account as a source of history, most scholars argue that when we are using this account as history, it should be handled with care. The reason being that Plutarch himself differentiates his account from history. He writes that he is not writing history, he is writing lives or biography. Thus, he himself did not consider his work as history. While reading Plutarch's account of Alexander, one can also get a sense that the main aim of Plutarch is to show how great Alexander is. For Plutarch, nothing portrays the greatness of Alexander than to claim that the king of Indians, Chandragupta, once met Alexander. This attempt of Plutarch to glorify Alexander can also be seen from the fact that in his account he describes Chandragupta as saying that Alexander could have easily conquered the whole country. This is nothing but propaganda. As I have said earlier, if this meeting really happened, then Curtius, Diodorus or Arrian must have surely mentioned it. Considering that Chandragupta Maurya is one of those few ancient Indian rulers whose name appear often in classical Western sources, then surely if this meeting ever happened, then Curtius, Diodorus or Arrian should have talked about this meeting. But there is not even a hint, which clearly suggests that this meeting never happened. Now, if you liked this video, do watch these videos as well, where I talk about different aspects of Mauryan history. If you like this channel, do subscribe. Thank you for watching.